Hey everyone, welcome back to Close to Consciousness. My name is Shalise Ansola. I'm your host today. We are bringing on someone who we just interviewed from the Hasidic community. They were from the Hasidic community. They are no longer. We're going to be diving deeper into the topic of how you can help someone who is from a vulnerable population or vulnerable or strict community, specifically religious community, when you are a professional of some kind. Oh my gosh, today my words are not wording. But we're gonna dive deeper into that. Let me just bring her on real quick. Thank you so much for joining us, Sara Glass.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here. I'm so glad we get to just chat about some of the things that have come up since that original interview was posted, because it's
Mhm.
been fascinating to read the comments, and I'm just excited to dive in.
Yeah. So we usually start by asking you how it's been, how have you been received? Have you been getting DMs, positive, negative, hopefully mostly positive? What's it been for you after you got almost 100,000 views already?
That's wild. Like, I can't believe so many people took the time to watch. And that's what I'm trying to do is just spread the word about vulnerable populations. So I'm happy really for any genuine reactions. It doesn't always have to be, but great. But people have been wonderful. Like, so many people just privately DM me to say this story meant a lot to me. I can relate. I'm from a similar community or from your community. And it just warms my heart, that I got to have this platform. Thank you.
Yeah,
And
of
then there's some
course.
controversial comments. That is fine. Like, that is absolutely fine because then we get to talk about it some more.
Yeah, and I think that brings up a great point, and we are going to talk a little bit more about some of those things. First, I want to read a few of the top comments, what we were getting on your video. And guys, after this, make sure you go and watch the full interview. It's fantastic. Details about Sarah's life, growing up Hasidic as a gay woman, what it's like, what was like having kids, being married, and leaving. All of that is in greater detail in that interview. And also check out her book, Kissing Girls on Shabbat. It's awesome. Highly recommend. We'll put the link in the description, of course. So the top comment from Avocado294 has 462 likes, which says a lot. It says, I'm from one of the ultra Orthodox Jewish communities. These interviews heal me. Leaving feels so isolating, but hearing about others who left makes me feel so much less alone. And just the fact that that's the top comment really shows that there is a need for this.
Yeah.
I mean, when looking for people to platform, because I know that there are quite a few people who leave and do feel alone in every type of group, it's been really hard to find people willing to speak out. And so I'm really grateful to you as well for being one of those people who are choosing to speak out. And then the second comment, 343 likes, Kissing Girls on Shabbat is the most kick-ass title with the painted nails.
Yeah. Oh,
So, so, so good. And then the last one I wanted to read before we move on is Momo F4 NYC. I grew up in a Hasidic community and developed a deep appreciation for the interviews conducted as they serve a source of solace and solidarity. It is comforting to realize that I'm not the sole individual who has navigated the system and ultimately decided to depart. Acknowledging the inherent challenges associated with leaving, I extend my utmost respect and admiration to those who have embarked on this transformative journey and emerged as courageous individuals. Very well said.
oh, yeah.
So, yeah. So thank you so much for coming on and continuing to share, especially about the most vulnerable parts of your life, might I add.
Mm,
Because I mentioned in the first interview, I was so excited when I was reading your book and seeing that you were delving into those more difficult or sensitive topics such as childbirth,
yeah.
sex, and all of that, because I do think it's such a taboo topic across the board, not even just across religions. And
Yeah.
it's really nice as a woman to see another woman bringing that up and pulling that into the forefront of conversation, the conversations that need to be had ultimately.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just like stunned by the comments. It's so nice that people are resonating with the story. And if I could make one person feel less alone,
Mhm.
it's worth everything.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the topic for today, which is how medical staff or any person in a position of power can do better and can help those in vulnerable positions, even if they have preconceived notions or biases about these people. So, why don't we start by having you tell one of your few stories? I know you have quite a few. Um,
Mhm.
Maybe we start with the time you were giving birth and you weren't allowed to get Pitocin.
I mean, honestly, I didn't even know that that was something that I should be talking about. I didn't realize it was different than what other women experienced until way later. And so it's still kind of fresh, and I'm even telling the story, and that I know it now that it matters, you know? And so what happened was when I was 22 years old, freshly 22 years old, a couple of days after my birthday, I was in the hospital giving birth to my second child. And at that time, I decided I wanted an epidural. So they did come and give me an epidural. I was allowed to make that choice. I had been prepared by my instructor, who was a religious Jewish childbirth instructor. You may ask for an epidural. And at that, then my labor slowed. And the nurses came in and they saw that my labor was slowing and they said, we should add a Pitocin drip, which is like standard procedure for an epidural. If you don't add a Pitocin drip, labor can completely stall and be extended on for days, hours, or even days. Like, you know, so it's something that's standard protocol. And I talked with my husband about it because that is what I was trained to do. I was told to do that from a young age. And he said, I need to call the rabbi, but it's 11 p.m. He might be sleeping. And so my husband elected to not call the rabbi until the morning. What that meant was that I was in labor by myself in a hospital room. And then the epidural wore off, and I started to
Mhm.
feel my contractions. And, you know, and this went on for an additional 12 hours. So it's a complicated story. And I want to talk about the medical professionals in that situation. Looking back at that now, like I'm a PhD psychologist. I have an LCSW as well. I just think about those nurses in that hospital system in like Ocean County, New Jersey, where I lived. They were used to seeing so many Orthodox women come in, and we looked different. We had wigs or hair coverings, we had long skirts. We were accompanied by men who were dressed in like black and white garb and carrying like books in Hebrew or Aramaic. They knew that we sort of differed. And so they knew not to question the rules by which we lived. But looking back now, I sort of wonder what would happen if a nurse had come up to me after my husband left the room and just said, by the way, if you want me to start that drip, I can, you know? And I talked about that a little bit, and then we got some reactions to that. And we can talk a little bit about that. And I was so tired. I was so tired. You're right.
Yeah.
Whoever said that in the comments, yeah.
I think that one really hit home for me. As you
Yeah.
guys know, if you follow the channel, I just gave birth 8 months ago, and I have had an epidural wear off, and I have had to have Pitocin. I had a 46-hour labor, so I get the type of pain that you were in and how frustrated I would have been if I didn't have bodily autonomy to say, "I need this," or even knowing that that was an option,
Mhm.
because were you familiar with what Pitocin was at that point?
I was vaguely familiar with it as a concept, but I didn't understand what that would mean for my body or
Right.
potentially the stress it would put my baby in.
Mhm. Yeah, because that is something that both you
Like to
and your
not have
baby
it,
were put
you
at
know?
risk.
Right.
Yeah, we were put at risk for delaying that and for making your labor go on for hours and hours and hours, and I wanted to point out, if people missed it, you were alone because your husband didn't want to be in the room because he felt you were immodest, right?
He was worried that because of the labor, like some of my hair would come out of my head covering or maybe like an elbow, and he definitely did not want to be there when I gave birth because that was completely immodest.
Yeah, that's a lot for someone to
Yeah,
take in, and you're 22 years old.
yeah. And it was my
So
second. Yeah.
Right. The other thing I'm going to some of these comments. So actually, let's tell the birth control story first because I want people to also understand how in control the rabbis are. And this is in your case too. I don't mean when I speak, I don't mean to make blanket statements. Let me just
Yeah.
put that disclaimer. We're talking about your story and the people around you because, of course, I'm sure it differs drastically among different communities. So that's not to say that everyone has this experience, but this was very true for you. So let's talk about the birth control situation and then I'll read this comment and we can talk about it.
Yeah. I was in a particular segment of the Orthodox Jewish community. In addition, my particular husband was sort of out of touch with my emotions. And so, given all those factors, I was taught to follow his word and his lead. He didn't know what he was doing, and that was sort of like a difficult frame for both of us. I was supposed to follow his like orders, and he was like, I don't really know how to give orders. So he would just ask the rabbi, but he didn't always know how to ask the question or how to include my voice in the question. And so, like, so many bad things happened because of how the system was framed for us. So there was one point after I had my son, I was 19 when I got pregnant with my son, and I gave birth, and I was in grad school, like sneaking out of the community 1 day a week to go to college and try to get a master's in social work. And I had permission to use birth control for 6 months from the rabbi. That was like standard, give yourself 6 months. But I was tired. I had a 6-month-old baby, and I didn't want to get pregnant again. I was also in a master's program, which was demanding, like internship, classes, a baby. And so my husband and I went to visit a rabbi in his study. And I remember him like just being piles of books all around him. And he's like staring at us over the dusty books, mostly at him, not really at me. I was sort of irrelevant. And I started explaining in my like modest little voice, like I addressing him in third person, I'm tired. Is it possible? May I get another little bit of time? And the rabbi looks at my husband and says, does she have any physical problems? Is she sick? And my husband said no, which was true. Like, again, he was just trying his best, I believe.
Mhm.
And so the rabbi said, no more birth control. And 2 weeks later, I was pregnant with my daughter.
Oh my
And
gosh.
so they're 15 months apart because I gave birth to her like a little bit early. My body was so stressed. I didn't even you know, remember like who I was anymore. I didn't know I was 6 months postpartum. Like my clothes didn't fit yet. I hadn't gotten back to myself. I was still adjusting to the whole new role. And I was forced to get pregnant again and not use birth control. So that's
Mhm.
another example of how the system just like operated in a way that I don't believe it was intended necessarily to operate.
Mhm.
But that can happen in like high control groups like that.
So what would you have liked to see from the doctor or OBGYN who was prescribing you the birth control?
Well, at my doctor's visits, I mean, I I would have liked for them to talk with me about the possibility of giving me a prescription that no one needed to know about. And they didn't need to be that explicit. I would have loved for the doctor to say, by the way, these are the different kinds of birth control. Like, because they're aware at that point that I don't really even, they probably are aware that most of the women from my community don't know that much about it. And I would have appreciated, like, for a doctor or a nurse to say, and we can prescribe that to you. It can go to your pharmacy directly there if you would like that. You just need to let us know. They didn't need to say, like, "We'll do it without your husband, without the rabbi." They just needed to let me know it was available to me.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's really important, and just something so subtle like that instead of making assumptions or just not asking in general and just, I guess, taking your word for it. I mean, was your husband supposed to be there at those appointments?
He wasn't, but because of the town and the way it was set up, the doctors were very much in touch with the rabbis,
Oh.
and so they already knew the rules. And when I went to the OBGYN, what I would be doing is sitting in a waiting room of other women in wigs and scarves and long skirts and, multiple pregnancies. And so it was like I was part of this, like, um, I don't know, like group of indistinguishable people in garb.
Hmm. So we wanted to address this comment. I know you had something to say because you're also a social worker. So Claudia
Yeah.
says, I live near this community and I'm also a social worker. The problem with offering members of this community choice is that we are then sued for anti-Semitism. True story. So what are your thoughts?
So I'm going to be honest with you. When I saw that comment, I got mad. I really got mad. Sorry, Claudia. I also have compassion for you, and I'll talk about that. I got mad because I am a therapist and I am in a position every single day where I need to make decisions about whether to protect someone or to protect myself. And there are times in my career as a therapist where I have called ACS when I thought a child was in danger. That's Child Protective Services in New York or DIFUS in New Jersey or, CPS in different states. I've had to say, I think this child's in danger and I'm going to make a report, even though I know whoever that person is who hurt the child will write negative reviews about me online. There are times I got sued. People came after my social work license for protecting children.
Wow.
But I made the choice to protect children because who was going to do it if not me? I
Hmm.
was the one who saw these kids in my office who said, you know, my daddy hurt me. Like this bad thing happened to me. And so I bear the scars of fighting for people who are not able to fight for themselves. And when I saw someone say, I'm afraid of being sued, I was like, how do you think of yourself instead of the woman who's being potentially going through marital rape, forced pregnancy, going through like horrific lack of choice and autonomy over her own body? You're worried about being sued? Being sued is that's a pile of legal paperwork. You have malpractice insurance, you're an adult with autonomy over your own life. You can deal with being sued. And okay, so that was my initial mad reaction. However, as a therapist, I understand it's scary because, and as any helping professional, you don't want to lose your license to practice. You worked hard to get it, and that could be the way you pay your rent or your mortgage or the way you put food on the table for your children. So it is scary to lose your license. I don't want to minimize that. But what I hope people do if they're in a situation like that, where you're feeling like I could say something that would help this person, but it's scary for me, is call your malpractice insurance's attorney and tell them what you're going through and what you're being faced with, and let them advise you on what to do. Or call a supervisor, get a team together to make a decision with you, right? But don't just be a bystander.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. So I guess I came around to just ways to handle it, but be aware when you're in that situation that you are looking at people who don't even know the words with which to speak up about the things they're experiencing. They haven't often sometimes haven't been taught that what's happening is not okay, or how to say it's not okay, or who they're allowed to talk to. I
Right.
didn't even know at the time that being denied that medication was not okay. It was only after my book came out that I realized, oh, damn, that mattered. Because people had reactions to it and they called, people were my friends were like, I'm so sorry you had this dangerous second birth. And I'm like, I guess I did. I actually did, but I was so in denial of my own body that I didn't even know it at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's so much to talk about. We're going to get back to this, but first let's get to some questions. See if anyone has any questions for you. I read all of Sarah's book last night after watching her episode. As a foster adopt mother, I resonate with this part of the conversation so much. That's
Oh,
great.
thank you so much for reading.
Yeah. It's definitely a quick read. Um, Patty, very proud of you. I'm 65, grew up in the South. Being gay is always hard. You are much younger, but with your upbringing, it must have been horrible.
Hmm. Thank you, Patty.
Everyone's so kind in the comments.
Yeah.
Rachel, the number of stories I could tell about my own experiences in the medical system, and I don't have the added bonus of being, quote, othered because of my cultural religious background. I'm so sorry.
Oh,
Yeah, I think that's something to know, and I wanna get your opinion on this, Sarah,
yeah.
because there are people, even just women, being believed in general, right? When we go
Yeah.
in and say we have symptoms, well, lose weight or go on birth control
Yeah.
or go off birth control. And so there's already this fight to just be heard and
Yeah.
seen and valued. And so now you have this added layer of people assuming things about you. So maybe for those who aren't familiar with the Hasidic community, and of course you're speaking from your experience, but could you give us some examples of things that may be assumed about you because you're a part of this community and because you looked the way that you did?
Okay. So one was that like I would continue to have children. No one ever asked me, "Do you want to have children?" It was really weird. Like when I became a social worker and I started treating people outside of my community, people would sit in my office and say, "I don't know if I want to have kids." And I'm like, "What?" Like I would just be quiet. Like I knew enough to be quiet, but inside my head, I'm like, "You can ask that question. Like you're allowed to do that?" I didn't know. I didn't know it was like it could be a choice in the world. It wasn't definitely not a choice for me.
Mhm.
Um, and when I went to the gynecologist, like everyone in the waiting room was pregnant, in garb, in wigs, in skirts, continuing to have kids. So it was just assumed that like I would just keep up. My sister has 10, my other sister has 8, 6, like everyone just the only reason why the one sister has 6 is because she had some miscarriages. 4, so she that I know of, like,
Oh,
she would have had 10. I had a couple of miscarriages, I could have left that marriage with 4 kids. So that was definitely assumed. It was assumed that we would need to ask the rabbi before making any big medical decisions. Um, After one of my births, like, I had this extra skin vaginal skin flap that got left over from my labor because it was a really, like, painful, like, sort of violent labor. I think it was my 2nd birth. And I remember the gynecologist doing his exam on me and saying, "Oh, yeah, that's an extra flap." And he said, "We'll just get it next time you give birth. In the delivery, we can clean that up." Never once did he say, like, you know, "Do you want me to fix this now? Would you like birth control? Do you feel like you want to have another child? Talk with me about your plans." Right? Like,
mhm.
all that was so assumed.
Wow. Are these doctors who are also Hasidic, or they just are so ingrained in the society that they are basically just enveloped in the community?
I think there's a financial incentive. If you build a medical practice in some of these communities, so my doctors were not Jewish. There was like an Italian guy. Like, I if you build a medical practice outside of like these hubs, an OBGYN practice, and the rabbis like you can buy that second country home, buy the
It's
yacht.
a lot of business.
Yeah. So you don't want to piss off the rabbis because you're just raking it in
Okay.
at that point.
Yeah. So in his mind, he doesn't want to even get in any sort of hot water by giving you options because then there goes his business.
Exactly. And these
Okay.
rabbis are very involved, right, in the reproductive system, and so they'll call doctors and say, like, "Okay, this woman is bleeding. Tell me about the blood," so they can decide if it's pure or impure blood and things like that. The rabbis' wives will call the doctors to get details about what's going on in someone's uterus. And when they feel like a doctor gets it, that becomes a doctor for the community. It's not
Wow.
it sounds more insidious than it felt at the time, but it doesn't sound great. Now that I'm saying it out loud, it doesn't sound
Well,
great.
and I don't know if it's necessarily insidious or they have bad intentions, but the fact that you just don't have control over your body and reproductive system in such a big way, that's where I have issue with it because of course, if this is something that you're choosing, if you're choosing to have multiple children and you're choosing to give over your control to somebody, and this is actual choice, this is not coerced choice, then that's fine if you're comfortable with that. But
Yeah.
you didn't even realize you had a choice. You were so ingrained with this patriarchal system that you didn't know you could push back. You didn't know what your choices were. You didn't, like, there were so many steps where, like you said, you didn't even realize it was so traumatic or out of the ordinary until people started telling you that. And so I think
Yeah.
that's why we want to do this podcast tonight, is to just put that in people's minds if they work with those who are considered different or considered super religious or something. Just have it in their mind that maybe these people don't know. Maybe it's just a simple conversation. You don't have to make a big deal of it. Like you said, you don't
Yeah.
have to be like, okay, this is on the down low, don't tell anybody.
Yeah.
But you can just lay it out in ways that maybe they already do know that information and it is what it is, but maybe they don't, and you're making a big difference by speaking those things into existence so that they understand they have choices.
Yeah. And you may go up to someone and say, like, hey, I can prescribe this for you if you want to. And that person might get upset with you. Like they might say, how dare you? I just told you I don't want it 5 minutes ago with my husband here. Did you not hear me the first, but that's maybe what that person has been conditioned to do.
Yeah.
And so do it not because you're going to get a great reaction. Do it because people need to know that choices can exist, and it may be years later before they access those choices. There are times I have like Hasidic men in my office who are afraid of having more children, but they have to have sex at a certain amount of times per month or like uh, on certain days, and they feel powerless and trapped and worried about like getting stuck in marriages with all those children. And so I've said, there's a procedure called a vasectomy. It's something we can look into at some point, and it's some way to have control over how many children you do have, because they don't know that, right? And they should just have access to the information. Never once has someone said, oh my God, thank you so much, I'm scheduling that right now. They usually look embarrassed or scared and say some mumbly thing. But now they know.
Yeah.
And maybe in 5 years after kid number 7, like they may think about that conversation, right? And so what I'm doing
Yes.
is implanting this idea of choice, which every human being deserves.
Yes, exactly. That's such a great point. Offering, not looking for a particular outcome, but offering knowing that that conversation may come up in their head 5 minutes from now, 5 years from now, in any sort of capacity to where they know that there's options. Let's see if
Yeah.
there's any questions in the chat. Let me go to the start comments here. Leslie, so do some rabbis potentially allow birth control for certain medical conditions? What type of condition might qualify?
Okay, so conditions that would be life-threatening to the mother or child. Uh, and they'll rely on the doctor to define life-threatening. So if someone has had a C-section, they may get an extension on birth control because there are more risks to getting pregnant right away after a C-section. There was one point where I was granted a further extension because I was iron deficient and had severe anemia. And that could have like caused a miscarriage or caused me to become like someone who couldn't stand on my own 2 feet and couldn't be a mom to my existing children. So it has to be something like kind of dangerous. Certain
Right.
heart conditions.
I think you had talked about they don't really take mental health into consideration, though. Am I remembering right?
Partially, um, also, no one wants to disclose mental health.
Mm.
Many people don't feel comfortable disclosing mental health, like, struggles, because that is something that then can become a stain on the family name. So, for myself, for example, when I went to the rabbi to ask for birth control, the last thing I was ever gonna say is, "I feel depressed and anxious." because my family had a history of like mental illness already, and I didn't want to be further stigmatized or to stigmatize my children. Because it's such an insular community, everyone knows everyone. So if
Mhm.
Rabbi F knows that I had depression and anxiety, then when my child is suggested as a potential match for his granddaughter, he might say, look into that family further. That mother was a little crazy.
Oh, wow.
Because information lasts forever in insular communities. And so I wasn't willing to put myself at risk by disclosing mental health struggles. So that's part of it too.
Just that sentence, put yourself at risk when you are at risk because you're depressed or have
Yeah.
anxiety, but s the other consequences outweigh your own well-being and your need to feel better.
Yes, like there also could have been consequences to my career. I was a therapist in this small enclave. And so I was a well-regarded therapist even at that young age. And if the rabbi had known that I was struggling with my own mental health, the next time someone said, "Who do we go to because our child has been hurt and we want a child therapist?" or "Who do we go to for trauma?" They wouldn't say my name. That woman's crazy. So those consequences outweighed the risks to myself.
Jeez. Yeah. Wow. Did you ever I'm trying to remember, did you ever go to a therapist who did offer solutions for those things when you were still in the community? Or did you never bring it up before you left?
I was in therapy for many years, but my therapist was Orthodox. And so, like, there was still like, my therapist did know about my family history of mental illness and about some of the things I worried about. And I trusted her, she was like HIPAA compliant and was very cautious about that. But there were limitations to that because when I came to her and told her I may be attracted to women, as an Orthodox therapist, she tried to dissuade me from that notion.
Mm,
And she said, you've always had a little bit of a self-sabotaging streak.
that was her response?
Yeah. And I was like,
Oh
I
my
can't, things are
gosh.
going okay right now, but I just can't stop thinking about women. And I've been thinking about women since I was a teenager, like girls since I was a teenager, because I'd been seeing her for 10 years by then. And she said, like, yeah, you've always had that tendency to self-sabotage. So there are therapists in the community, but like, and some are wonderful and some are not like that. But some have inherent limitations due to their own belief in a system that can be oppressive at times.
Yeah. It seems like they have limits and boundaries based on the belief system where they can't necessarily go outside those. Aren't they trained about that kind of
Yeah.
thing? Like, how
It's
does
really
that
weird because, like, when I went to social work school, I went with a car filled with other Orthodox women, and what we were supposed to do was to protect each other from the influences of social work school. So we would get back in the car at the end of the day and say, "That thing didn't line up with our beliefs. Let's forget about that part of the lesson." Like things related to
Whoa.
choice and things like that. We just were so trained to filter out anything that didn't fit.
Okay.
Yeah. You're like, "All
Wow.
right.
That's
Yeah, I'm not going to that therapist."
crazy.
Yeah.
That's so crazy. You're learning about these things in a secular school and then purposely tuning it out because it doesn't fit within your box. Wow.
That's
Yeah.
how deep
I
the
mean, it makes
conditioning
sense.
can go. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I mean, I've had part of that myself with turning off your critical thinking.
Yeah.
Um, it actually just reminds me, and it's kind of relevant, if you've ever seen the Book of Mormon play, they have this whole song about being gay, and they're like, "Just turn it off like a light switch." It's fun little Mormon trick. That's kinda what it is. You have to turn
Yeah.
off critical thinking. They think you can just turn off being gay. You can't. That's not how it works.
I tried.
So
Like, I tried so hard. I got married twice to 2 separate
yeah.
men. I was still gay. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just the opening of your book is so visceral and so you feel for the young you who's just in deep love with this woman and you can't, this forbidden love. And I think everyone can, to some degree, relate to being in a relationship and knowing that it can't continue for whatever reason and that heartbreak and, ugh, go read her book. Okay, let's see if there's any other questions here.
There's a lot going on in these comments. I know.
Megan, I have a couple of nurse friends who work at the hospital in Lakewood. I just told them that they need to hear this. They are
Oh,
tuning in, praying your words will help
oh,
someone. That's amazing.
thank you, Megan. That is
Um,
where I was. I was at
You
like
were?
the Long Branch Hospital in Monmouth County, right near Lakewood. So I'm so happy that you're doing that, Megan. Like that means the world to me. I'm like,
I'm tearing up over here. Just the reach, you telling your
mm,
story, me finding you, and doing this today, the ripple effect is just incredible. That's so
wow.
awesome.
Thank you so much for this platform.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't do it without people like you. So thank
Yeah,
you for being willing to come on and share. Wow, that's so amazing.
of
I'm gonna move
course.
on before I
Yeah.
just break into full-on tears.
Yeah. Anytime I'm offered a platform, I'm like, I'm gonna take it because I can speak now, and I know how many people can't do that yet.
Yeah. Richard
Mm.
says, "Hey, Richard." He's on here quite frequently. Welcome, welcome. In Sarah's opinions, why do religions seem to demand to control women? What's the deal?
Right?
What's the
I
deal, Sarah?
know. What is the deal? I do like it's interesting. I don't know because I'm non-binary, maybe like I use she they pronouns. So I have so much compassion to the men as well. Like these poor men are given power that they're not trained to handle. Imagine being told like you can't be emotional. You're in charge of the spiritual well-being of your whole household. And this woman that, like, you've never dated, never engaged with a woman before, like, in an intimate way, and now you're in charge, it's like being put as a CEO of a company when you're 7 years old and have never gone to college. And so, of course, there's, like, misuse of power and things that happen that I think, like, everyone gets hurt in a system where the balance of power is off,
Yeah.
and women get hurt, in different ways. Yeah.
I feel like who was it? I feel like someone said this in one of our interviews. Maybe it was Beatrice who said, if the women realized how much power they had and they just stood up for themselves, the whole system would completely crumble because it
Yeah.
relies on women staying small and staying submissive. Yeah, you
Beatrice is a very wise woman. I love her so much. We know each
Yeah.
other. It's
Oh,
like we
that's
all hold each
awesome.
other up on the outside. We find each other once we leave, and then we'll like go to coffee and just be heart friends forever because we know what
Yeah.
the other person has been through.
Yeah. Okay, Lady Victoria, question comment. So I'm not Jewish, but I grew up near a village of Jewish women, and in that section, we were told that if the child died prematurely, that they would make her hold the baby the 9M.
9 months.
Oh, oh, oh. Oh, not
Mm.
be able to
Like
have
have a DNC or an
pregnancy.
abortion. I
Right.
haven't heard that. We were able actually to access like medical abortion healthcare. And, abortion is like a Jewish value when needed in situations where a baby has passed, a fetus has passed, and carrying that fetus to term would pose a health risk, like
Mhm.
in the medically necessary situation. So I haven't heard that, and I hope that's not true. Let's put it with like the narrative about having sex through a sheet. I don't know anyone who's done that either.
Someone said that to me, like, "Oh, yeah, I heard they have to." I was like, "I haven't heard that in any of my interviews, but maybe people don't wanna talk about it." So that's not a
Yeah.
thing according to you in
I
your
don't I've never met, like, a single Hasidic person, and I was Hasidic for a long time, like, who has done that.
okay,
Yeah.
okay. Next, Rachel, does Dr. Glass have any recommendations for others who would be willing to share their stories with us?
I do, and I already sent them along. Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? Let's see. Wendy, I don't always catch the C2C live. Thank you for providing this platform for all of your guests to provide a safe place for those leaving high demand religions to let
Mm,
others know and they are not alone.
mm,
Thanks, Wendy. Rachel, so grateful to catch this live. What an amazing story from an amazing person. And thank you, as always, Shalise and Jonathan, for providing the space. You're welcome. Thank you, Rachel, for
mm,
being here. Leslie, definitely cannot wait to fully listen to Sarah's audiobook now.
mm. Oh, thank you. I really am proud of the audiobook. I narrated it in my own voice, and that was such a privilege.
Yeah.
And I just kind of feel like hearing, like, I left all the emotion in there. There were times I cried while narrating, and they said, like,
Mm.
"Do you want us to edit that out?" And I was like, "No, leave it in," you know? So I
Awesome.
hope you enjoy it.
That's awesome. I have the book. You can't see it. It's on my shelf. Actually, I think it's that one right there.
With the kiss on the side. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Oh no, you're late. That's okay. You can listen to the replay. So, guys, if you're watching, it's super helpful if you leave comments, especially after the video is posted. And of course, liking and sharing really help boost the algorithm. If you want to find Sarah, make sure you go visit her on all the platforms at Dr. Sara Glass or Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. They're all the same, right? The handles.
Yes, all platforms. Yeah.
And your website, drsaraglass.com.
Keeping it simple. Yes.
Yes, that's great. I love it. And was there anything else that you would like to say, according to the topic today, something that you would like to tell medical professionals or anyone in a position of power who could potentially help someone?
Have a heart, let yourself feel. Look at somebody and look into their eyes and don't be afraid to feel empathy and compassion. And also protect yourself. Like you can get advice, you can get help from others. You can do both. You don't have to choose just one. I know, like you nurses, like you're heroes. I don't know how you do your shifts. Anyone who's helping others, I know burnout is real. You're doing these jobs because you love them and you need to maybe and you want to keep your job. And I respect all of that. Just try to hold both the heart and the protection of yourself and your career.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Just having compassion and empathy and seeing them as another human being, not just another number, or not just another Hasidic person or insert high control religion here, but someone who you would want to care for as if it were your own daughter or sister
Yeah.
or anybody. So beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank
Of
you.
course, thank you for coming on. It's been fabulous talking with you again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. All right. Well, do you have any other final thoughts before we go?
Just thank you to all the people who are being so kind in the comments or reading the book. Like every person who likes and comments, what you're doing is actually like boosting the algorithm and helping these messages get to people who need it most. And it does help. If you read the book or listen to the audiobook and you feel comfortable and safe to leave a review, that does help the book get recommended to people who are looking for answers and who may feel alone. So thank you for
Yeah.
engaging. Like your engagement matters and we
Yes.
see it and appreciate it.
I second that. It's so
Yeah.
important and it's so helpful. Our community is amazing. Everyone who chimes in. I mean, I feel like it's 95% positive in the comments, and I feel like that's unheard of on any social platform. So I feel very lucky to
Yeah.
have such an amazing community. Speaking of community, we just launched our next C2C vacation. I promise it's not
Mhm.
culty, guys. We just go adventure together. We went to Costa Rica. It was amazing. We put up a video about it if you want to watch the highlights. We're going to the Oaxacan coast of Mexico next. It's going to be very beachy, snorkeling, boat tours, watching little sea turtles get released into the ocean, all that fun stuff. The link will be in the description. We just launched it, so go book your spot now if you're interested. And I think that's it. So thank you so much
Thank
for watching.
you.
And until next time, follow your high stick excitement, be conscious and be well. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you. Have a good night, everybody.